Some analysts say although an increase in the unemployment rate has been recorded in the first quarter of the year, a more significant rise in unemployment can be expected in the second quarter due to the impact of COVID-19 and the consequent lockdown. Data from Stats SA shows that the unemployment rate increased to 30.1% in the first quarter of this year from 29.1% in the fourth quarter of 2019. The data further indicates that the number of employed persons decreased by 38,000 to 16.4 million, while the number of unemployed persons increased by 344,000 to 7 million in the first quarter of this year compared to the fourth quarter of last year. The largest employment decreases were observed in the formal sector, followed by the agricultural sector, which is also in the formal sector. They are in the Free State, Northwest, Western Cape and Limpopo. Political economist at the International Labour Research and Information Group, Dr. Dale McKinley, joins us now for more on the jobs quagmire. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. So the official unemployment number for the first quarter has ticked up even more than was actually predicted. Just take us through what you see as the drivers of the increase.
Well, I think that everybody would recognize that our economy was already in trouble. Last year, we saw the unemployment rate basically every quarter basically increasing. So a 1% increase in this case of the official unemployment rate is not going to be that surprising. What it points to really is structural deficiencies, which have long been there in our economy, and which now the COVID-19 pandemic, I think, has surfaced even greater, to a greater extent, which is that the formal economy is simply not absorbing the kinds of job seekers that are necessary, even to keep the employment rate at the same rate it has been, at least for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So what we have is we have a formal economy that's shedding jobs and an informal economy that's increasing jobs. And what that tells us is that we need a fundamental rethink in the way that jobs are created in the country. And I think that's what the statistics are telling us.
The other number that's of particular worry is the expanded unemployment rate. That's now at 39.7%, which amounts to 10.8 million people. These are people who are out of work. They're of working age, but they've now given up on looking for a job. What runs through your mind when you consider this group of people, especially in light of what you just said prior, around how we need to re-engineer the way that we create jobs, because some of these people in that statistic haven't worked for years?
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the other quite amazing statistics that came out of this report was that graduates, in other words, those with matrics and even those with university education, that 33% of graduates are without jobs. And that's incredible. So what that tells us is that small-scale businesses, medium-scale businesses are certainly not getting the support that they need. If we're going to simply rely on corporates and large-scale industries to absorb jobs, what the job statistics are telling us is this is a failed strategy. And so essentially, if we're going to try to absorb more graduates and those that are at the youth end, and particularly the 15 to 34-year-old bracket, and what we're going to have to do is have much learnerships, more educational sides of things that are where jobs are not necessarily permanent jobs all the time, but learnerships as well. We're going to have public works programs that are going to have to be expanded drastically. We're going to need to have small-scale businesses within townships supported to create jobs. These are the kinds of things that we've been talking about for time, but in which our government and unfortunately the private sector have basically ignored, and it's catching up with us.
Yeah.
And I think, as you mentioned, when we get the statistics at the end of the second quarter, they're going to be a lot worse than these ones.
A slew of ideas there that you're coming out with, but what needs to happen to actually affect them? Because like you say, the second quarter is going to be a disaster in terms of, the unemployment impacts because of COVID-19. Some people lost their jobs and they may well be reinstated as the lockdown eases. But of course, some people will have lost their jobs permanently. So what do we do? Because this really is an emergency.
Absolutely. And I think we've already had some discussions about this in public, which is this COVID-19 pandemic provides us with an opportunity to rethink our economy. What do we mean by that? Or what do I mean by that? I think that basically what it is essentially infrastructural development first. we are way behind in basic infrastructural development. This will create a range of jobs, public sector jobs, but also would provide the foundation for small-scale and medium-scale businesses, particularly in underserviced rural and township areas, to begin to grow, and for other economic opportunities. I think what we also have to do is have a much better integration of skilling and educational learnerships with job creation programs that are there, again, in medium-sized in particular businesses. And the third thing that we need to do is we need to rethink the bureaucracy and the red tape and the tax regimes that are for small and medium scale businesses, and make it much easier for people to basically get beyond what are now almost impenetrable barriers to try to create small businesses and medium and to sustain them. So these are some of the things that we need to do, and I think that we can do, given the fact that we're going to be in a serious crisis where our economy is estimated now this year to be contracting by at least 10%, possibly.
Yeah. So what about at the feeder level? When I say the feeder level, I mean the education system. We know that the educational outcomes haven't been that great, but COVID-19 has obviously really dealt a severe blow to the education system, with several of our children not going to school for months and not even looking at a book for months for whatever reason. Perhaps they don't have access and so on and so forth. And there's been a slight minority that's been able to still do e-learning and so on and so forth. To what extent do you think that impact is also going to impact the ability of growing the economy and being able to churn through, decently qualified people going forward?
Well, I think it's certainly going to have a very negative short-term impact. It's clear. I think the most of this year has been lost in terms of the educational year. And let's be honest, I think that's going to be the reality. But I think what it does is provides a longer term to medium-term perspective of rethinking, again, the way in which our educational system is working. And what do I mean by that? I mean, first of all, the government, the key thing that this has exposed is the infrastructural deficit at the educational levels, where your rich kids are basically going to be able to have access to online learning, and poor kids are not going to have that. So that needs to be fundamentally addressed, because there are opportunities on that front. And secondly, it basically points to the fact that the kinds of subject matters and the kinds of things we're teaching in schools needs to, again, be better aligned to what it is that we need as a society. Not what the private sector needs, not what corporates need, but what our society needs. And I think in that case, we have an opportunity to match the educational skills with the societal needs much greater than we have, because right now we have a mismatch, and we have people that are graduating from schools with degrees but who cannot get jobs simply because they're not going to be absorbed into a formal job market. If there's one lesson to be learned here, it's that the formal job market in the context of the last 20 years is not working for South Africans, and we need to create new job markets.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dale McKinley. He's a political economist at the International Labour Research and Information Group.